Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Gold and Black Live. I'm joined by Brian Neubert and Tom Dienhart. I want to thank our sponsors, and that, of course, is Triple X on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. And they are open for business. Greg and Carrie Erzman doing that. And I want to also pay our respects to Jack Erzman, the father of Greg, and was he was the gentleman that bought the Triple X a few years ago. He passed away this week. Great man, and we appreciate all he's meant to us over the years. And Hilton Garden Inn, too, when tomorrow's a big day, stay at HDI tonight. And, of course, State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. Brian, I'll start with you. Obviously, Purdue has a big game. Every game's a big game in the Big Ten anymore, but the Boilermakers face Northwestern tomorrow at 4:30. That's a Saturday afternoon Big Ten Network game. And, again, a disappointing loss, obviously, for Purdue on Tuesday. But as I think you wrote about, nothing really changes. This is a team moving forward. And what will probably be, even though the Wildcats have lost 8 in a row, they got your attention a little bit because they were able to beat Indiana and Michigan State off the jump. What do you expect for tomorrow? What do you expect to see from Purdue?
Yeah, well, Purdue will actually be whole, finally. We expect Sasha Stefanovic to play. This will be game 11 this season where they have all of their key players available. So that helps. Perhaps allows Purdue to build back a little bit more of that momentum they had going before the Michigan game when he tested positive. But, the Maryland game was a toss-up. It was a one-possession game there at the end, where that's kind of the nature of the Big Ten this year. It's all sorts of games played between teams that are just as good as each other, but very few who are that much better than anyone else. And a lot of these games are just going to come down to that last possession. Purdue won 2 in a row with the win at Ohio State, which might be the best road win of the Big Ten season right now when you look at where Ohio State is, and doing the same thing at Michigan State. And it went the other way on them. It was just a matter of they couldn't get that one last stop. They couldn't get that one last good offensive possession out of their last 2 or 3. And that's the nature of the Big Ten. But I don't think anything really changes. I think Purdue is still way ahead of where conventional thinking suggests a team like this should be. Good to come back home. Good to get a game against, shall we say, a beatable opponent. I don't think Northwestern is so downtrodden right now that they should be completely dismissed because they do have some capability to them, as they showed early in the season. But I also think they've lost 8 games in a row for a reason. And I think even when they were winning, they were that same team. I don't think anybody looked at Northwestern when they were 3-0 in the Big Ten or whatever they were and said, man, they're going to be a factor this year. I think that was a bit of a fluke. And I think that, Purdue is just going to have to play well tomorrow night, and if they play reasonably well, they should be okay. But again, the Big Ten this year is one you just take no one for granted.
Yeah, I tell you, Alan, and Brian, it's 10 teams have been ranked, I think, this season. Brian pointed that out when the Boilers cracked the poll earlier this week at 24 in the AP. Incredible. I can't recall a season where this many Big Ten teams have been ranked at one time or another. I guess for me, guys, I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen up in Michigan. They've been in pause for a while. You wonder when they're going to come out of pause and how that's going to impact the Big Ten race, I guess. So I'm fascinated to see what's going to occur with the Wolverines, who have been the cream of the crop, a very good Big Ten crop this year. So I know there's a lot of hoops left, and like Brian said, it's kind of fun seeing Purdue back at full strength, full muscle. And I know you wrote this, Brian. I'm trying to think what Purdue's record is when they have their full arsenal. Is it 7-3, I think?
7-3.
7-3. So you got to like the chances that they got some home games coming up. They got to go to Minnesota, I think, after this game with the Wildcats. Always tough in the barn. But again, I was looking at that schedule the other day, and you got to like Purdue's chances to finish with the flurry here.
Yeah, Purdue's schedule it sets up fairly well. As I mentioned before, the requisite qualifier here is that, you take no one for granted in the Big Ten. The trip to Minnesota is going to be no picnic. The trip to Penn State is going to be no picnic. You still have to play Wisconsin here, but it's better than it's on paper. It's easier than what you started with. Wisconsin's the only ranked team left on the schedule. And when you look at the first half of the Big Ten schedule, I think pretty much everyone except for Indiana was ranked. You didn't get the Nebraska game, so but Purdue set up here, and conversely, Tom mentioned Michigan. Even had they not shut down, we would have found out a lot about Michigan because their schedule is backloaded. They have all of their games here to come for the most part, and now that's going to be really interesting to see how they come out of pause and jump right into the proverbial frying pan there. So the last couple of weeks of this Big Ten season are going to be absolutely fascinating. Purdue got a lot of its most difficult games out of the way, but has to play as well as it did toward the end of that string. And, Michigan, and I still say that had Purdue had a couple practices without Sasha Stefanovic to prepare for that Michigan game, they might not win that game, but they don't lose by 17 either. So I think that we will see how quickly Purdue can hit the ground running again. But if they can build up that momentum again that they had before Stefanovic went out, they're set up pretty well here. They were 7-3 with their full arsenal, but they'd also won 4 in a row, and they'd won 3 road games in a row. So they didn't just, it wasn't just the totality of that of that 10 games where they had everybody, but it was how they were trending. So we will see how quickly Purdue can recapture that, if they can recapture it all. The good news is, I think Stefanovic being out too also, might have empowered Jaden Ivey a little bit, might have empowered Brandon Newman a little bit. That might, in the long term, that might make them better too. We will see how it plays out starting tomorrow night.
Ohio State, you mentioned the win over Ohio State. Purdue's win in Columbus because Ohio State goes to Iowa last night and wins. It's a really interesting league. Brian, you've watched it closer than probably definitely more than I have, but it's really interesting of how rank your 3 or 4 best teams in the league. I mean, you saw Michigan in person, and obviously but Rutgers is really a good roster. They've had injuries. They've tried to work their way back to health, but if you're going to put the top 3 or 4 teams in the league, I mean, is it as simple as saying Iowa and Michigan and Ohio State and team number 4? How do you see it?
Well, it's a hard question to answer because I think there's very little separation, and I think that's what Purdue plays Minnesota, and we're talking about how they haven't won a road game yet. Well, they haven't won a road game because of who they played on the road, not because they can't play on the road. Purdue plays at Maryland. They haven't won a home game yet. Well, they haven't not won a home game yet because they're not capable of winning a home game. They haven't won a home game yet because of who they played. That's kind of the nature of the Big Ten. Everybody's just as good as everybody else except for Nebraska and probably Northwestern. I mean, it's not all that uncommon in the Big Ten, but you see Indiana go to Iowa and win. You see Purdue go to Ohio State and win. Things like that. I was never a huge fan of Ohio State on paper, but it's time for me to start changing my mind because they just keep winning. And I've never been a huge fan of Wisconsin on paper. I think they're good because they're old. I don't necessarily think they're that good because they're that good. But you have to put those 2 probably up there. You have to put Iowa up there because they're so formidable scoring the ball. They don't guard anyone, but except when they play Purdue. But you still have to put them up there with all their offensive skill and all their experience. But you still have to look, in my opinion, at Michigan as the number 1 team in the league. I think they've got pros on that team. I think they've got a ton of experience. I think they defend. I think they score. I think they've pretty much got it all at this point. I still like Illinois, even though I think they're a little bit of a wild card from a variety of perspectives. But I think it's a good place to start when you have an elite guard and elite big. And they play hard. And I would probably say Michigan number 1, Illinois number 2. Even if they keep losing games, they shouldn't lose. Probably Iowa number 3, interchangeable at number 2 with Illinois, and then probably Wisconsin right behind them. I'm sorry, I forgot Ohio State. Michigan, Ohio State, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin would be my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, Purdue's
right there
done enough good things here where you can probably reasonably put them at number 6 probably. I might be forgetting someone, but I don't.
I think you got it. And I think that's a good take on that standpoint. It's really going to be interesting to see and it would be a fascinating Big Ten tournament. Some talk, Tom, and I want to get back to the Big Ten tournament for basketball, but Tom, you had some revelation about football schedule, and the Big Ten's got a lot on its plate in terms of juggling all this stuff that's going on and trying to make things work. We'll start with your football talk and your 3-2-1 this morning on the site that it appears that there'll be a revised Big Ten football schedule upcoming, because Purdue, you would think, would not play Nebraska 3 straight years at home. Those types of things going on. What did you find out, and what do you see in that situation?
Yeah, of course, the genesis of these scheduling quirks you alluded to, Alan, were that Big Ten only schedule that was hatched for the 2020 season, of course, amid the pandemic. And conference did what it could to get that schedule together. That schedule included some of these quirks we talked about, like Nebraska coming to Purdue for a second year in a row, like Purdue having to go to Wisconsin for a second year in a row. Of course, that game never came off this last year because of a COVID outbreak by the Badgers. But here we are, 2021, on this regular conference cycle, and lo and behold, here comes Nebraska, scheduled to come to West Lafayette for a third year in a row. And of course, Purdue is scheduled to go to Madison for a third year in a row. So again, yeah, that's what I'm hearing, fellas. The schedule will be revised. I don't sense it's going to be some great shakeup. I'm sure they're going to try to do all they can to make the disruptions as minimal as possible. But again, Purdue's not the only school with these scheduling oddities or quirks, if you will, that the league, I think, wants to get ironed out. So that's something for people to sort of keep their eye on moving forward. Of course, in recent weeks, guys, just the last week or two, we've seen the SEC and the ACC release their 2021 schedule. So two of the bigger leagues already have theirs out. And again, the Big Ten, like I said, it sounds like we're going to see some tweaks to that 2021 version, guys. And it's going to be fun for Purdue, 2 non-conference games on the road after the open with Oregon State and Notre Dame's back on the schedule. It's going to be a very fun, I think, schedule for Purdue.
Yeah, open up September 4th, and if all goes to plan, against the Oregon State Beavers. Brian, been talked about, the Big Ten tournament in terms of now moving back to Indianapolis, as we understand it, and the bubble. I don't know I assume that has something to do with it. The fact the NCAA tournament's also going to be revolved around there, but. What's your gut feeling about, obviously there's been a lot of talk about teams that are safely in the NCAA tournament may not want to show up, yet the Big Ten tends to stick together. There is money involved, obviously. You've got national television contracts that are a part of this. What's your gut feeling in terms of, and I know we have still 6 weeks to go before we get there, or 5 weeks to go, I guess it is, before the Big Ten basketball tournament, but what's your feelings of whether this will come off and what it will look like when it does, or is it just way too early to tell in COVID world?
Well, I don't have any reason to think they're not going to have the Big Ten tournament. I know the plans are in place to have it in Indianapolis. I don't think they would do that if they didn't plan to have it.
Right.
I don't know how thrilled everyone will be to have a Big Ten tournament. I think everybody's goal here is to make sure the NCAA tournament goes off without a hitch here, and bringing 14 teams together from however many different states it is, right before the NCAA tournament, put them in the same building. A lot of them won't have much to play for at that point. Just doesn't seem like a great idea. The Big Ten tournament is there to make money, and there are no fans going. That part of it is off the table. My opinion, I don't have any reason to think it's not going to happen. I do have an opinion that it probably shouldn't happen, because I think it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. From a money perspective, I think there are things you can do to give your television partners some high-end games there at the end of the year to make up for not having like a championship game or whatever for CBS. I think extending the regular season another week would let you get as many as 3 more games in. And right now I don't know how many games in the hole here that you have to reschedule. And for the integrity of the Big Ten regular season title, and I say this with the qualifier that, hey, the most important thing about this season was having a season. The most important thing about this season is having an NCAA tournament. But nitpicking over the integrity of the Big Ten, the regular season Big Ten title, is probably not the big picture here. But I think if you want to not have the most illegitimate regular season title in Big Ten history, you can't have somebody playing 20 games and somebody playing 17 games and somebody playing 15 games. That's just not, that might fly in Major League Baseball when everybody's playing 163 and the difference between 163 and 158 is minimal. But if somebody doesn't play Nebraska twice, that matters just as much as, somebody not playing Michigan twice. And there's already an unbalanced schedule that's always baked into it. But this year, it would not be representative of the season as a whole if you have, a very incomplete schedule. So if you extended things out a week, that would give you the best chance to get at least as many games as you possibly can in. If you backloaded it with Michigan or Michigan State, Michigan, Iowa, something like that, there are those games left on the schedule. You could always push those back to Selection Sunday right before the selection show if the selection committee would be on board with not having a conference tournament to go off of. I doubt that would be a problem, but you could always put some of your high-end games there in some of those TV slots where your semifinals and finals would be. And I think Michigan State on Sunday afternoon, potentially with a Big Ten title on line for Michigan, I don't see much difference, from CBS's perspective in that than I would, Michigan versus Wisconsin for a meaningless Big Ten tournament title, something like that. I'm only speculating, obviously, on the names. Yeah. Obviously, the names can change, but from a TV asset perspective, I think there are things you can work with your TV partners on to make sure that you don't compromise that really important part of it too. That's just my opinion. I mean, that just makes sense to me. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to play a Big Ten tournament, and the utility involved with canceling it and extending the regular season out a week would seem pretty significant under the circumstances.
Yeah, logistically, I guess they're going to play them in Lucas Oil, and I don't know whether that's to run interference from what's going to be played at the NCAA tournament the following week. I'm uncertain. And the Big Ten has to decide, or all conferences have to decide by some point this month, what is going to be what's going to determine their automatic qualifier into the NCAA tournament, whether it will be their tournament or their regular season, I guess. And another interesting storyline to watch. So, all right, well, we will move on to guests 2 and 3. Chris Foreman will join us in segment 2 with Brian, and then I'll have Mark Monteith. And Purdue fans know Mark Monteith, who wrote the book on the Purdue basketball season some 30 years ago, still working, writing books and on the Indiana Pacers, et cetera, and has been a follower of Purdue sports for a long time. So we'll have him on segment 3. Guys, we'll let you go and appreciate your time, and we'll take a short break, and we'll be back in a couple minutes for segment 2 of Gold and Black Live.